Welcome to the Dragon's Den. I'm your venerable host Orochi, and today we're going to be talking about design philosophy in 5th edition and Pathfinder 2nd edition, and where some of it came from. Specifically, this is sort of a targeted enlightenment campaign for all the 3rd edition grognards who jumped to Pathfinder 1st edition because they really didn't like 4th edition, and all the people who kind of just stopped playing for a little bit or found other things until 5th edition came out and then jumped right on that. This is kind of a wake-up video for those kind of people to show you that all the designs that you hated of 4th edition are still running strong in the current editions of both games. And in fact, that's sort of why I like Pathfinder 2nd edition, because it has a lot of the things that I liked about 4th edition in it. And so I'm just going to point out what those things are just to show people the kinds of complaints that I've seen about it. It's like, oh, well, the things that you didn't like are still in the games you play right now. They're just hidden. They just renamed them to different things, and you accept them as they are. So, for 5th edition, what we have is your basic attack action. For all martials, when you get multi-attack and that sort of stuff, if you have spell strike, all the things that take your primary action to do. All the specialty things, spell strike, fighter maneuvers, all of those super really good things. You know what those are? Those are Atwell Powers. That's what those are. You know where those came from? Right here. 4th edition. Atwell Powers. You can do them once per turn, as much as you like for a lot of them. 5th edition likes to put numerical limitations on things by saying, oh, you can only do this X amount of times a day, blah, blah, blah. But that's really just poorly designed overhead, for whatever reason. 5th edition likes its overhead and forcing you to keep track of shit a lot, which is just busy work, like really pointless busy work. Whereas it's done a lot better in Pathfinder because martials have flourishes. That's right. All your flourish attacks that you can only do once per turn, those are at-will powers. It's exactly what they are. You can only do them once in a round, but you can do them as much as you want forever. That's literally what an at-will power is. Cantrips are basically the same way, which is what they were designed around. And they just expanded from there. So, you're still using those at-will powers that you didn't really like, but you also have the ability to do whatever else you want to, which I've heard a lot of people, well, not a lot, but I've heard people say that certain DMs didn't allow you to do anything else except those at-will powers because that's all the game said that you could do, which is just like, you need to learn how to GM properly, because the whole point of an RPG is that you can do whatever the hell you want, or at least try. That's what all the numbers are there for. That's what all the powers are there for, is to give you inspiration on things that you can try to do. And for both 5th edition, 4th edition, and Pathfinder 2, all the feats that are there, all the class abilities that are there, all the things that tell you, hey, this is the exact thing that this allows you to do, that's what it allows you to do. That is the tried and true way of doing that one specific thing to get a reliable result. But you should be able to use your actions to do whatever the hell you want to try to do, and your GM can tell you how difficult that's going to be and what kind of skill that might pertain to and what kind of bonus you would get to it and what kind of stat you're using for it. Or they just might have you do a flat check. several things in Pathfinder 2 have flat checks. It's all up to your GM and how they want to run things, and you should be able to be open to allowing your players to do whatever. And so you can probably accept that fine. Things you do once a round being Atwell Powers, that's just semantics, naming it a different thing. That's fine. That's not really what a lot of people are super angry about, probably. So what about the rest of the stuff? Well, in 5th edition, the vast majority of classes have short rest abilities. What do you think those are? You can use them once per short rest. And for Pathfinder, all spellcasters, and even some marshals who dip into spellcasting flavor, have focus powers. What do you think those are? Those are both just reflavors of 4th edition encounter powers. That's all they are. They've put additional limitations instead of, oh, you get these back free, to, oh, you have to jump through some hoops to get these back. But you look at the underlying paradigm of the system, and you should have these stuff most of the time, especially in Pathfinder 2. You're supposed to go into every fight at maximum capabilities. Max health, max focus points, all that good stuff, so that you can tell just how strong the enemy is versus just how strong your party is. That's why Pathfinder 2 is so well designed. From a GM perspective, Pathfinder 2 is just an infinitely better system to run, because so long as you're keeping up with giving your players that short 10-minute rest so that they can heal themselves up and get their focus points back, then you know, hey, they're predominantly going to be at max fighting capacity, so you can throw stuff that is a challenge for that level of strength. And if you're going to be throwing lots of encounters at them, rapid pace, then you can throw much weaker encounters at them and kind of hope that it won't kill them and it'll be a decent challenge. Whereas 5th edition is like, that's always the hope, is that it won't be trivial or won't TPK, because there's no balance whatsoever in the system from top to bottom, just zero. But those are your encounter powers, and they're really good. 5th edition has amazing encounter powers, and you should get them back very often because they're just fun to use. And I think Pathfinder 2 sort of dropped the book some with just curtailing all that stuff to focus powers and saying, oh, these are spells. They have to be spells. They're only focus spells. And then we give rangers focus spells, and we give monks focus spells, and we give champions focus spells. But those are all classes that have fundamentally at some point had some sort of spell casting capabilities. Even monks stretch it a little bit. They have key abilities, which are basically spells, instead of just saying, these are encounter powers, everyone can fucking get them. Because why the fuck not? There's no reason not to do that. And hopefully at some point going forward with Pathfinder 2, they can just break that wall and just say that they're focus powers. Not spells, just get rid of spells and just say, these are focus powers. Exactly the same thing as encounter powers, and everyone can get them back, and they all use the exact same mechanics, so you know exactly how they work for everybody. And that's good. That is a good thing. And then the last thing that is straight up 4th edition design is your once-a-day abilities, which are daily powers. All spells have always been these things. But both 5th edition and to much lesser extent Pathfinder 2 have daily powers in them. The ones for Pathfinder 2 generally are terrible because they don't fit within the balance of you're supposed to have these all the time, and they are also not what you would expect given that design facet that you can't have these all the time. So you would expect, oh, if you're only doing them once a day, they have to be really powerful. But in Pathfinder 2, they specifically say, no, nothing can ever be that powerful because there is a power ceiling that is very, very close to the almost power floor of most characters. Where your character is supposed to be is very close to the maximum amount of power that you can squeeze out of a character, which is good for the most part, but this makes their daily abilities in this awkward place where it's like, well, if they're not going to be used every fight, then how good can they be? And most of them end up just being similar to things you would do all the time, just slightly more niche most of the time, and therefore not worth it because you're only going to get this once a day, and it's still not better than something else you could choose that you could do all the time. So that is a major problem. Whereas the class powers that are once a day in 5th edition, they're all cool stuff. They're all super flavorful, super awesome things. And a lot of the classes have them instead of just spellcasters having slots. Everybody has daily powers, which is all a very good thing. The big problem with 4th edition was that it was basically before its time. It came too early, and I think like right now, if they redid 4th edition, it would be pretty damn popular. 4th edition was just really good design with bad implementation. It has some really bad sore spots in the system here and there, but it's got a lot of good stuff in it. Like the mixing of martial and caster defense targeting. It's like, oh, casters can target all of your defenses, your dexterity-based saves, your charisma-based saves, your wisdom-based saves. And you get a little bit of that in Pathfinder 2 because you have martial maneuvers, like trip targets reflex save, and grabbing people is their fortitude save, and disarming is I think reflex save, and those are really cool, but those sorts of things should also be just everywhere in the system. Marshals should have special attacks that target these sort of defenses, and you could make for a much better varied system by just including, you could build entire classes that are just like, oh, this class is good at targeting reflex and will saves. That's their abilities, because that's how all the casters are designed. And it's often a thing brought up that, oh, if a caster can target the weak save of something, then they're ahead of the curve and they're doing better than fighters and marshals who can only target AC or this, that, the other thing. It was like, if everybody had more opportunities to target different saves for different things, then that'd be just better for the system overall. And 4th edition also had it great where your damage scaled with your level. All your stuff just scaled up automatically, which was great. It didn't scale very well. I didn't get to play high level, so I don't know if there are certain things that made it feel better than it looked, because it's only like 1 damage bump at level 20 for most abilities, and if you're gaining hit points every level, then that's a problem. Because that's one of the things that Pathfinder 2 does very well, is damage scales up appropriately. As long as you're getting your appropriate damage runes, then the number of hits it takes to kill a monster is generally going to be the same throughout your career. And your chance to hit is generally going to be the same throughout your career, and you just have to figure out ways to change those numbers with tactics. Your build can affect that some. In fact, you want to try and squeeze out in your build as much damage as possible, because that's just good play. But in general, since the ceiling is so high, so close to your general baseline optimization, There's not a lot of squeeze, but it can be good to do so. But it's nice to have all of your abilities scale up, because that's the problem with spells in both systems. Spells are much more powerful in 5th edition just because they're written more powerful, but also the spell casting system in 5th edition is better because you can just upcast your spells whenever you want. It's like, oh, you brought this 2nd level spell and you want to cast it at 5th level because none of the 5th level spells you want are good in this situation. It's like, well, bam, you can just do it. You can just upcast it, and that's great. 2nd edition Pathfinder, for whatever reason, people, 1st edition grognards complaining in the playtests, from what I hear, rather ruined the way spellcasting might have been, and we might have gotten something good instead of probably one of the worst versions of spellcasting we've had since 2nd edition. It's really convoluted for no reason, and it just doesn't need to be. Spellcasting should be much more simple and much open, because even 5th edition's system, I think, is too many hoops to jump through. 4th edition had the best spellcasting, because it's just like, you should get more slots. It's like, boom, you have 8 spell slots, fill them with whatever freaking spells you want, and those are the spells you bring in the day, and you can just cast them, and they're all cast at your max level. Like, ease of use, and you always know how powerful your stuff is going to be, which is just easy on the GM as well. And one of the best things, I think, from 4th edition that isn't in either 5th or Pathfinder 2 that really should be, and if either system had been more built around this idea, they would be infinitely better. And that is levels divided by power scale. In 4th edition, you had your low level. Level 1 to 10 was your low level. You're doing normal humanoid kinds of things, and you're just your general everyday sort of regular hero type stuff. Which, if that's the power scale you want your game to be, then you always start at 1st level and work up till 10. And that's fantastic. And then from 10 to 20, the power scale grows higher and is like minor superheroic. You're doing stuff that's, within the realm of human capabilities, but you're more like your action heroes, where it's like, yeah, you're not flying through the air at 1,000 miles an hour, crushing planets or any fucking weird nonsense, but you're doing heroic stuff that is at the pinnacle of human capability and into the realm of superhuman. Which, if that's the kind of stuff that you want, then you can just start at 10th level. You can just make a 10th level character, and bam, you immediately starting your game with that kind of power play in mind. And then you could go from 20th level to 30th level in 4th edition, and that's where your super heroic action hero god, like, starting to step on the toes of God's level of power gets to. You get to the late 20s, and that's when you can start, doing your missions where you might meet the gods and slap them around a little bit, or maybe even take their place. But even early on in the 20s, you're doing things that are far beyond human capabilities, the kind of stuff that legends are made of. You look at a lot of fantasy stories from human history, and they're all filled with super heroic stuff that is beyond belief, and that's where a lot of your late teens and early 20s sort of play should reside. And if that's the kind of scale you want from your game, you can immediately start at level 20 and go from there. or if you want to run a broad campaign where you start as a nobody at level 1 and eventually make your way up to, messing with gods, then you can play the whole length of levels, and that's fantastic. Your game should be designed with that stuff in mind so that you can try to be balanced for the whole course, because you can't play high level D&D 5th edition because it just gets bonkers and it's almost impossible to challenge your party because the game's not balanced. The classes aren't balanced, the encounters aren't balanced, the powers aren't balanced, the spells aren't balanced. None of this stuff works together at all. Pathfinder 2 is far better at that sort of stuff, but you can also chop Pathfinder 2 up into these weird little bits where it's like, yes, from 1st to 5th level, everything's sort of weakly balanced, with strength marshals being the best. And then from level 5 to level 7 or whatever, it's a different little chunk where things are different because spellcasters can no longer hit at the same rate as marshals, and there's all of these different chunks where different proficiencies match up differently, and the certain things plateau at certain different levels and some things keep going, and it's kind of a mess because it's not streamlined like 4th edition was, where from 1 to 10 all players are balanced in this sort of way, whereas in Pathfinder 2 it's all over the place. You can literally play 3 different one-shots at different levels, and depending on what those levels are, you can have a different selection of classes that would be the strongest, which is a real unfortunate thing. That if you were trying to design from, that long-term sort of idea of playing from first to last or making everything viable and balanced, you would definitely do it a different way. There was also some really cool mechanics specific to 4th edition, like the minion mechanic or the bloodied mechanic, and you can easily bring these sorts of things into your game and create your own mechanics around them. The minion mechanic in 4th edition was fantastic because it was just like, instead of bringing in however many enemies you would normally bring, you can make like a mini boss encounter, or just make an encounter that seems more threatening than it actually is by having a bunch of creatures who only have 1 or 2 hit points. And you just make it so that you only do 1 damage when you hit them. You make it so that creatures take 2 hits to kill. That way, your mages can blast all of them with 1 hit, and then your marshals just need to get 1 hit on them, and all these things die. Or make them even weaker. They only require 1 hit to die. But they still have the same offensive capability of dealing massive damage to your party. So this makes it so that, you can have medium numbers of enemies who pose a large threat if your party is slow and doesn't deal with them quickly, but they're all going to go down fast so that your players can quickly get the upper hand. And the bloodied mechanic was cool just because you could design like MMO kinds of bosses with this mechanic. Or like Monster Hunter bosses where, once a enemy gets down below half their health, they go into rage mode. They get new abilities that they can do, and they get new attack patterns because they get a different play style or whatever. Like, that is a sort of mechanic that you should definitely bring into your game to spice encounters up. And it was cool that in 4th edition, the thing that made Dragonborn cool is because they had their own mechanics. When they got bloodied, they'd get like a +2 to hit or damage or whatever it was. And it's like, that is a cool thing. They get angry when they get hurt. And you can add those sort of mechanics to your game too. But you'd be touching a lot more on the core balance that way, so be very careful if you're going to do that sort of stuff. But there it is. lots of really cool 4th edition stuff that's still surviving today. And I think both Pathfinder 2 and whatever D&D 1 becomes should definitely try to grab a lot more inspiration from 4th edition, because it had some of the best design that has ever been in a TTRPG. They just didn't refine it enough and didn't put it into the game in a palatable way for a lot of players. One of the good things about Pathfinder 2 is that it's modular. A lot of things are the same and can be swapped out with each other. 4th edition maybe just went too far with that, and everybody just saw, oh, everything's the exact same. All the classes are the same because they all have an encounter ability and at-wills and utility powers and blah, blah, blah. It's like, but as long as the core class has its unique mechanic, plus all the encounter powers and stuff are just the filler and the way they express their core class design in the way that they're supposed to play. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that if you do it right. So, yeah. You're still using 4th edition design philosophies, whether you like it or not. And it'd be better if everybody started using more of them and expanding on them and making them better. That is all for now. See you in the next one.